My name is Ezra Hernandez, and I will be sharing the Argentine rock revolution and its influence on our current listen on music. Uh, Many cultures, not just ours, but cultures all around the world, of course, appreciate music, create their own music for either themselves or for worship or tribal traditions. But of course, this music most likely spreads, and Argentina was not an exception towards this. They, of course, had a revolution that changed the music world, essentially, especially rock in Spanish. Uh, Many of us do not listen to, well, I can't assume that many of us don't, but I have an idea that most listen to just mainstream music. But those who listen to much older music, maybe rock in Spanish, understand that understand that they understand the purpose of this lecture. Many of us listen to songs from the 80s or 90s, of course, but many of them don't accredit the Argentine rock revolution and its influence towards their favorite music. Argentine rock, also known as rock nacional, or also you know uh, translated into national rock, was a movement of rock being sang in Spanish in Argentina, and it was of much influence to Argentina, Latin America, and eventually the world, though not very well known, because as this movement occurred, Argentina was in a state of suffering, especially in the dictatorship they were experiencing during that time. And some notable bands are Los Gatos, Arco Iris, my personal favorite, Vox Day, Almendra, and Manal. Why should you listen to me about such a topic? Well, Argentine rock has to be my favorite genre of music. I grew up listening to different styles of music, pop from the 80s, 60s rock like The Doors, which were once my favorite band, of course. The bit of the Beatles, um, Led Zeppelin. But when I discovered Argentine rock, I fell in love with it. From the moment I listened to a song called Presente, or translated in English, Present, by Vox Day. But what Argentine rock inspired were primarily these bands, most notable, the third one on the bottom left corner, Soda Stereo, considered the biggest band to have sprouted from that age. But alongside was Maná, Enanitos Verdes, and of course Hombres G. But how did Argentine rock come to be? Well, of course it was the Beatles. The Beatles always have to do something with music, right? The Beatles were of much influence to the world, and not just the English speaking world, but the Spanish speaking world. And Argentina was one of them. Their global influence provided insight to this band called Los Gatos, which translated in English is the cats, but it influenced them to release their first original song that wasn't translated from an English song and put into Spanish lyrics. The first song was called La Balsa, and what that means is the raft in English. The raft, why the raft? Why? What was the song about? The song was of floating aimlessly into sea by gathering wood on a raft to escape a saddened reality. And that reality was a reality that many Argentinians lived. Though the mainstream success of the Beatles, Los Gatos, and other Argentine rock bands weren't able to experience that as well as the Beatles did, of course. According to an article Found on the World by Lucia Benavides, which was published in November 23rd of 2021, is shared of a dictatorship that held a grasp on Argentina that prevented their music from expanding further out, just like the Beatles' music did. They believed they were in opposition towards the government. Sounds kind of silly when you think about it. How can music be that? But everyone had their own form of rebellion, especially towards a dictatorship, and this was one of them. They believed that their music was a form of rebellion towards them, of course. Though they were censored, their importance still grew and influence, of course, what we now know as rock in Spanish or rock en español. An article written by Pablo Vila, it shares of the dictatorship, of course. But through this dictatorship, many pioneers grew from that. We have Luis Alberto Spinetta from Almendra, Javier Martinez from Manal, and Gustavo Santaolalla, many of which are extremely important. And there are many to mention, like Leon Gieco or Morris. But how does this tie in with our favorite music? Well, that revolution, if it never occurred, I'm sure none of these bands would have sprouted. We have Maná, whose one of our favorite songs has to be Oye Mi Amor, or other people have heard La Muralla Verde by Enanitos Verdes. We have De Música Ligera by Soda Stereo, Devuélveme a Mi Chica by Hombres G, and Afuera by Caifanes. These are very, very important songs that have touched the community and influenced not just those of Spanish speaking culture, but those of outside of that. And on NPR during this time, of course, in Argentina, there was a war. There was a war, the Falklands War. And in that article, it mentions that though that war helped ignite part of the revolution as well. But of course, that revolution wasn't always believed to be able to happen. It shares that many, though the though the influence of the first rock song in Spanish, La Balsa, many did not believe that it would be possible to share to create music in the Spanish language. They believe it to be tacky and not to work at all. Yet, through all that negativity and through all that hardship, it managed to be and gave us such bands like this. And it is much influence to us as a community as well, of the Latin community. On a college work by Alejandro Martinez, which was submitted on April of 2024, very recently, he shares that he and others identified with rock in Spanish. And he mentioned a couple of these bands, primarily Maná, Hombres G, and Enanitos Verdes. He shares that the Latin community identified with this band much, and that this it came to be, and it influenced not just him but his a widespread community, which gave us this music we now enjoy. And I say we as many of us do, not all. But without the Argentine rock revolution, this wouldn't have occurred. So, though it's not very, very credited to these big bands, when you see these big bands, I'm sure you don't think of bands like Vox Day, Almendra, Manal, Los Gatos. No, no, you think of just them and their widespread popularity. But without the revolution in Argentina, we wouldn't be able to appreciate these bands. So I've shared with you that Argentine rock was the fire that ignited all these other bands to be. Now, when you think of these bands, when you hear these bands, when people mention these bands, you can remember, you can think about Argentine rock as it was a major influence. And no doubt about it, without it, we wouldn't be enjoying what we do now. So I would like to conclude that Argentine rock was the and its debut in 1967 was a turning point to our favorite music.